If I had to sum up the energy of the upcoming full moon in Gemini in one phrase, it would be fuck around and find out. There is a lot that this full moon in Gemini is going to illuminate to us. Some of the other keywords associated with this full moon are information and communication. Expect this full moon to be very busy. There's going to be a lot of buzz, a lot of activity, and people are going to be ready to speak out and speak up. One thing's for certain, this full moon is going to be anything but boring. If you want to know more about everything that this full moon has in store, stick around. You definitely don't want to miss this. Hello, my loves. As always, I hope that this video finds you well and in excellent spirits. If you're new around here, my name is Mel. I'm a professional astrologer, and I'm the founder of Divine Feminine Works, where I help people unlock their divinity and discover their magic. So if you're new, welcome. And as always, if you are returning, welcome back. So today's video is all about the upcoming full moon in Gemini, going down on Monday, November 27th at 4:16 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So you know the deal, or at least you should know the deal, especially if you've watched my previous videos. So the full moon is the point of the lunar cycle where we get to enjoy the fruits of our labor. So at the new moon, we've planted new seeds of intention, and at the full moon, those seeds have grown into fruit. It's where things come to fruition. So on the one hand, full moons signify endings, right? It's the culmination. It's when you pop the champagne and celebrate because the intention that you planted has finally come to fruition. On the other hand, full moons are also about illumination. Many things that have been hidden or many things that haven't come into our purview are finally illuminated, for better or for worse. So full moons can be a time of enlightenment and a time of learning. And speaking of learning, that is really the essence of this full moon in Gemini. Gemini has a lot to do with information, communication, and trust and believe that this full moon is going to give you a lot of that. For some, you may be learning that this is the time when something has come to fruition or when something is coming to an end. For others, this full moon may illuminate a slew of information that may not have been available to you in the past. One thing is for certain, whatever we're learning or whatever experiencing at this full moon is going to be either satisfying or is going to be quite interesting and really put our mental facilities to work, all right? So one of the main themes of this full moon in Gemini is the concept of learning. Again, many of us are going to be learning new things, or many of us are going to be learning things that really make us say, Like I said, this full moon is going to be anything but boring. So without further ado, let's get into everything that you need to know about this upcoming full moon in Gemini and what you can do to make the most of it. First and foremost, let's talk about Gemini energy generally and full moons in general. So I really alluded to the essence of full moon energy. It's about culmination and illumination. It's sort of a big crescendo. It's a big finale, right? Particularly as we're talking about the lunar cycle. Now, this crescendo, this finale is going down in the sign of Gemini. So of course, you're going to want to look at where Gemini is in your natal chart, and this will let you know what area of life this full moon is happening in, right? When we talk about Gemini energy can be a little hard to pin down. Think of a toddler, right? And I'm not trying to say that Geminis are immature. It's just that Gemini energy is very youthful. It's very all over the place. So again, kind of like a toddler, curious, into everything, running about from here to there. That's the essence of Gemini energy. Gemini energy has a lot to do with what I said before, information and communication. So a lot of relating to other people, a lot of talking, a lot of texting, a lot of emailing, a lot of information coming to you from all different places. As such, this full moon is going to be quite busy. It's not just going to be about important information. It's going to be about a lot of distractions, a lot of not so important information, useless shit, disinformation, right? It's going to be this slew of activity around us. And that brings me to another point about Gemini energy when I say around us. Gemini energy has a lot to do with not only our siblings and our extended family members, but the area immediately around us. Think of your neighborhood. Think of your immediate community. So this full moon in Gemini may not only signify a time of endings or culmination, but it may be a culmination that's happening right under your nose. It may be in your immediate vicinity. Like one of the basic mundane examples of like a full moon in Gemini is that like perhaps a building in your neighborhood is finally finished, right? Or there's a neighborhood project that finally comes to an end. Or maybe you're learning something about your neighbor or something about your community member, right? Remember I said this full moon has a lot to do with information. So when we're talking about Gemini energy, it's very curious. It wants to know things. It wants to learn things. It wants to talk to people in order to express itself intellectually. And expression is also a big part of Gemini energy because Gemini likes to talk. Gemini can be very chatty, sociable. Gemini is the social butterfly of the zodiac. So again, that lends the energy of this full moon in Gemini to be very busy, a lot of just shit going on in your immediate vicinity, right? Now, back to the whole curiosity thing. I want you to think back to June of this year, so June of 2023, when we had the new moon in Gemini. There may be something around that time that kind of sparked your interest, something that you were curious about and that you decided to scratch the surface and learn more about. You may find that at this full moon in Gemini, about 6 months later, this thing that you were curious about, that you started researching or that you started really delving into, you finally understand the bigger picture of it. You're learning the specifics and the details of what this thing entails. Let me just give a mundane example. Maybe you wanted to learn about knitting, right? And at the new moon in Gemini, you're like, you know what? Particularly if you have Gemini as your third house, really lends itself to being curious and learning a lot of different, if not random skills. So you decided to learn knitting. And so at that time, you started watching YouTube videos, you started getting, your stuff together, you started buying yarn and knitting needles and all of that good stuff. And over the last couple of months, you've been watching more videos, you've been learning different techniques, learning how to knit certain things. And now by this full moon in Gemini, you may have knit a scarf, or you may have knitted a sweater, or maybe you even joined a local neighborhood knitting group, right? Very mundane example, but that's sort of an example, right, of how this energy of the full moon in Gemini may play out, right? But again, I feel like while it may also signify culminations and endings, this full moon is going to be chock full of information that may be useful. Perhaps you may find that you are realizing that some people have been disseminating disinformation. But also one of the more important details of this full moon, and this sort of came to me in a channeled message when I was preparing for this video, is that many people may be realizing that the information they've been relying on is actually not that reliable. This sort of goes to the disinformation that I was just talking about. So maybe the things that you've been learning, maybe the news, for instance, has not exactly been reliable or even that useful to you. And you'll figure this out at the full moon because something may come to light, a mistake, a typo, something like that may make you think, maybe what they said wasn't really the truth. Or maybe this information really isn't as useful to me as I thought it was. Either way, this full moon in Gemini is going to be super illuminating. All right, so now let's talk about the numerology of this full moon and what it means for us. Personally, I love implementing numerology in these examinations because it can give you a lot more information. So in terms of the numerology, we're going to look at the number 4 because this full moon in Gemini is going down at the 4th degree of Gemini. So when we're talking about the number 4, the key word is the word work. 4 has everything to do with work, stability, dependability, and structure. Now, structure and stability is not necessarily, they're not necessarily words I would associate with Gemini. And it's not to say that Gemini is unstructured or all over the place. It's just that Gemini likes to flit about. Gemini likes to be all over the place. Remember, Gemini is the social butterfly of the zodiac. So when we're talking about the number 4, we're sort of talking about energy that's a little foreign to Gemini energy. However, I feel like it goes back to my example or what I said earlier about how the seed that you planted at the new moon in Gemini is finally coming to fruition at this full moon in Gemini. So again, at that new moon, you may have been interested or curious about something. And I feel like over the last couple of months, you've put in that work in order to see that or to satisfy that curiosity, right? So this full moon is going to be all about the work that you've put in over the last couple of months. Anything that you've done to provide more stability in your life, anything that you've put effort into, whether that's mental effort or physical effort, is going to be coming to fruition at this full moon in Gemini, right? Now, remember I said sort of the theme of this full moon is like learning and information. And so maybe at this full moon, you're learning that there's some more work that needs to be done. Maybe there's an area of life where you are lacking stability. And this full moon is going to give you the illumination and the information in order to let you know what you have to work on, or maybe who you need to talk to. Remember, this full moon has a lot to do with information and communication. So maybe at this full moon, you're getting the information you need to provide more stability in your life. Or maybe you're meeting the right people and having the right conversations with respect to that same stability and work, right? Now, like I said, the energy of the number 4 is kind of opposite to the energy of Gemini. Gemini, again, is flitting all over the place. The number 4 is about dependability, stability, conservative thinking, being dull, rigid, and sort of stagnant, right? But it's that energy, it's that sort of number 4 energy that allows us to get things done. That's how we put one foot in front of the other and get to work, right? Now, interestingly enough, another facet of the energy of the number 4 is change. And this is right up Gemini's alley. So when it comes to the astrology associated with the number 4, it has a lot to do with Cancer. Cancer is the 4th sign of the zodiac. But most importantly, when we're talking about Cancer, we can liken the energy of Cancer to the Chariot card in the Tarot, which is all about forward movement, which is all about movement generally, which Gemini energy just loves. Apart from that, the number 4 is also associated with Uranus, the planet Uranus, and the sign of Aquarius. And this energy is also in alignment with Gemini energy. Uranus and Aquarius have a lot to do with change, with rebellion, and with planning for the future. Now, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but the energy of the planet Uranus is somewhat connected derivatively to the energy of Gemini. So Gemini is ruled by Mercury. The higher octave of Mercury is Uranus. So it follows that even though the number 4 has a lot to do with work and stability and being stable and stuck, right? It also has a lot to do with change and rebellion, which Gemini loves. So under the light of this full moon in Gemini, I feel that many people are going to be illuminated to the parts of their lives that they need to change, perhaps parts of their lives that need more stability, or maybe that curiosity is going to get the better of you and you're going to realize at this full moon what you're really interested in or what information you'd like to learn more of. All right. So again, I feel like the energy of this number 4, right, the numerology of this full moon in Gemini has a lot to do with stability, but also with change. And when you put both of those together, it's sort of an oxymoron, but that's exactly how Gemini energy works. It's a lot. It's mixy. It's all over the place. And that's exactly sort of what the number 4 embodies with this full moon in Gemini energy. All right, so now that we've talked about the numerology, let's talk about the astrology associated with this full moon in Gemini. So when it comes to the astrology related to this full moon in Gemini, we're going to want to look at 3 different planets. The first is going to be the sun, because a full moon is when the moon and the sun are in opposition. So therefore, whatever the sun is doing is pretty relevant to the energy of the full moon. And with the sun being in Sagittarius, it's going to tell us a lot about the information that we're learning. Number 2, we're going to want to look at the planet Mercury, because Gemini is ruled by Mercury. So that's also going to give us a little more color with respect to the flavor of this full moon. And then finally, we want to look at the planet Mars, because Mars is in direct aspect to this full moon. All right. So first, let's talk about the sun. So the sun just recently went into the sign of Sagittarius. So on the one hand, we've got the full moon in Gemini that's mixy, that's really having us focus on what's going on around us, right? Now the sun is going to be exactly opposite the full moon. And with the sun in Sagittarius, while our emotions and our attention is really focused on what's around us, Sagittarius wants us to change. The sun in Sagittarius wants us to broaden our minds, move forward, and expand ourselves. So you may feel like you're on a seesaw, right? On the one hand, you're like, well, there's this stuff going on with my sibling, or there's this stuff going on with my neighborhood. Meanwhile, your energy and your emphasis may want to expand beyond all of that. You may even be thinking a lot about the future and thinking about the future in a very hopeful and optimistic sort of way, right? Next up, we have Mercury. And as if we don't have enough Sagittarius energy with the sun, Mercury is also in Sagittarius. So even though our emotions are really tied up to what's going on around us, Mercury and the sun are going to want to focus our attention on the future. Perhaps the information that we're learning about is really having us putting a plan together in terms of our future. Maybe we're planning a trip, right, to learn something new about a different culture. Or maybe we're planning higher education. Maybe we're trying to go back to school, whether it's college, grad school, med school, or law school. Or maybe we just want to experience life in a different way, be a little bit more adventurous and be spontaneous. Again, the full moon is going to have our emotions wrapped up in our immediate vicinity, whereas our mind and our ego and our energy want us to expand via that Sagittarius energy. And then finally, we also have Mars. And guess what? Mars is also in Sagittarius. So again, you may feel like you're on a seesaw at this full moon. On the one hand, you're focused on what's immediately in front of you, or maybe you've got all this information coming at you, emails, text messages that you have to answer, etc. Whereas your mind, your energy, and your focus, right, and effort are really miles away. Maybe you're taking a mental vacation. Maybe you are just focusing on the future, not really trying to care about what's going on right here, right now, right? So with Mars in Sagittarius, it's like our desires and our passion for expansion is on overdrive. We are really focused on the future, really focused on the big picture, and really not trying to pay attention to the details that may be pulling at our heartstrings or making us emotional in the moment, again, with that full moon in Gemini. So if you feel like you're on a seesaw, if you feel like things are out of whack, it's not you, it's the astrology. We've got the moon on one end, and we've got the sun, we've got Mercury, and we've got Mars in Sagittarius. So again, that seesaw kind of energy. And the best way to deal with that energy is to find a happy medium. While your attention via your emotions is all about what's going on right here, right now, and your mind and your energy are focused on the future, kind of meld the two together. Put out any fires, address any communication that's going on right now, but also take some time to plan for the future and think ahead. All right. So now that we've talked about the astrology, let's talk a little bit about manifestation and how best to use this full moon in Gemini energy. All right. So in terms of how to use all of this energy, if I had to sum that up in one word, it would be observe. So the full moon is not typically the time when you're doing any manifesting work, because like I said before, it's the culmination in the lunar cycle and in the manifestation cycle. You planted the new moon, you planted new seeds at the new moon, those seeds come to fruition at the full moon. So really, it's all about observing what comes up. What does the fruits of your labor, what do the fruits of your labor look like? But most importantly, with this full moon going down in Gemini, you're going to want to observe, especially with your ears. You want to keep your ears open to see what kind of information has come about. What are you learning? What has been uncovered? And most importantly, how can you use this information going forward? So manifestation, this isn't the time to set intentions. This isn't the time to really do much except observe and listen, right? It's going to be very important to listen more so than speak. However, for some, with this full moon being a time of culmination, this may be a time where you are speaking up and speaking out, especially when it comes to things like disinformation, the future, politics even. You may find a lot of that ramping up at the time of this full moon. But by and large, this is going to be a time of observation. The full moon phase is also the time when you want to conserve your energy a little bit. Apart from observing, this isn't the time really to do the most because you're going to need that energy to take the information that you're learning from this from this full moon and putting it to use. Especially over the next 2 weeks, this is going to be a time where you're cleaning house, where you're using the information to divest yourself of whatever you don't need. So again, the full moon is not the time to be doing the most. Really, you're going to want to just observe and conserve your energy so that you can get rid of what you no longer need over the next 2 weeks. All right. So now I want to give you some information that I received via some channeled messages that I think will be really useful and relevant to you at this full moon in Gemini. All right. So let's talk some channeled messages. Let's see what I have here. So first up, something you've nurtured since the new moon in Gemini has come to fruition. You are abundant and it is bringing out the haters, okay? So some people are going to see you really achieving something. And for some, that something is going to be recognition and accolades. For some of you, you know how I said that this Gemini energy is a lot of information and it's a lot of information and communication. Now, with this plethora of Sagittarius energy, Sagittarius also rules publication, like publishing. So for some, you may find that this culmination, this full moon, is bringing you attention because maybe something that you've written got published, or maybe you're on a podcast, or maybe you've been interviewed for an article. And this sort of information is disseminating. All your friends, your family, they're seeing all of your hard work or your recognition. And so it may bring out some hateration. It may bring out people talking, chatting, gossip. All of that has to do with Gemini energy as well. So be mindful of that, right? It's not like you have to give any attention or effort to the haters, but just understand that they might come out the woodworks with this full moon in Gemini. All right. Next, moving in the right direction or your purpose or mission. You did it back then, or you're learning that you need to do it now. Okay. So for some, you know how I said that, we've got this plethora of Sagittarius energy. So with the sun in Sagittarius, the sun in Sagittarius may really be pointing out our purpose, our direction, or our trajectory right now, right? Think of the glyph for Sagittarius. It's a bow and arrow reaching into the sky. So the information that might come to light at this full moon in Gemini is that you've either been on mission, on purpose, and now you're reaping the benefit of that, or this information may show you where you kind of have been lagging or you kind of have been neglecting your North Star, your purpose or your mission in life. And so this is the information that may enlighten you at this full moon in Gemini. So over the next lunar cycle, this is the information that you're going to want to start making use of. So for instance, like I said before, over the next 2 weeks, between this full moon in Gemini and the next new moon is when you're going to want to divest yourself of what no longer serves you. Now that you have this information via this full moon in Gemini on what your purpose or your trajectory is, anything that's not in alignment with that, you're going to want to get rid of or at least not give a lot of attention to. All right. Let's see. Again, recognition and accolades. So for some, get ready for that. I also have this message about other people's money. People may now want to work with you. Think of brand deals, sponsorships, etc. And collaborating with others brings abundance. All right. So this is going to want to be a time when you talk to others. You let people know what you're doing, what your purpose is, what you're working on. Disseminating information about what you do may bring in other people's money via brands, sponsorships, ambassadorships, all of that stuff. So this may be a time where you want to be vocal, or these brands and sponsorships are coming in because over the last couple of months, you've been vocal about what you're doing. So other people's money may start to be coming in right now. Okay. This sort of goes to what I was saying before. You're learning, or it's been revealed to you, that not following your North Star is keeping you in the dark, with dry pockets and alone. Okay. So that can be really useful information going forward, because now you're realizing that you need to work with others and that you really need to follow your true North Star. Reaping what you've sown. This was shown to me via the Wheel of Fortune. This could be an important turning point for some of you, especially depending on where this full moon in Gemini is going down. So you're going to want to look at your natal chart and see where Gemini is. This could be a very pivotal turning point for a variety of things in your life. But for some of you, it may feel like this huge crescendo that's putting you in a different direction and on a different trajectory. Okay. Next, if someone's been deceiving you, especially a friend or someone else, it might be revealed. With Venus in Libra, justice will prevail. So maybe some of the information you've received or that you're learning at this full moon in Gemini is that someone hasn't been fair to you, or someone's been deceiving you or lying to you. I feel like that information, as painful as it may come to light under the light of this full moon in Gemini. Let's see what else we have here. All right, whatever's revealed under this full moon in Gemini will give you a new or a different perspective. Things might slow down for a bit. So like I said, this full moon in Gemini, full of activity. At the full moon, things will be really busy, but then things are going to finally die down and you're going to be left with this newfound information. It's really going to be important to figure out what to do with this information going forward. Speaking of forward, the next message is keep moving forward, but keep an eye out and be cautious. Okay, this isn't to fearmonger or anything, but in moving forward, especially with the message I gave before about the haters, you're going to want to keep an eye out on who's around you, what they're talking about. You might also want to be very vigilant about the information that you are digesting at this time. There's going to be a lot of disinformation floating around, and you don't want to take that information and rely on it to move forward. All right. Next, it's time to make a swift move. Maybe taking a short distance trip, a weekend getaway, will not only be like good and fun, but it may refresh your mind. So you may want to plan a trip at this time, or you may even want to take one. Even if it's not like a weekend getaway, maybe an hour or two, you're going a couple of towns over. It's like a park or something like that. But regardless, some short distance travel may be good for you to refresh your mind. These next two messages go together, and I think they're the last two messages that I have. Number one, moving away from the shadiness and the drama. I feel like for some, there's going to be some information that comes about that's really like people haven't been exactly forthright. People haven't necessarily been above board. And now you're going to learn this. And the second part of this message is cleaning up your friend's circle, or cleaning up the circle of people that are in your immediate vicinity. Perhaps there is shadiness and drama going on there. Perhaps there are people who are gossiping or engaging in a lot of low vibrational conversations. This is going to come to light at this full moon in Gemini. And I feel like for some of you, it's really going to make you annoyed. Like, really? I've been talking to these people all this time about this bullshit, this nonsense. It's time for me to like stop. I'm not saying stop being friends with people, but maybe you need to change the direction of the conversation. Or maybe you just need to abstain from talking about certain things or certain people. All right. So those are the channeled message I have for you for this full moon in Gemini. All right, my loves. So that concludes this video on the full moon in Gemini. I sincerely hope that you were able to get at least one important piece of information that you can use going forward. If you'd like to know more about my products and services, all of that information is in the description box below. And I've tagged my signature service, the Blueprint, which is all a natal chart reading plus report. I've tagged that to the video so you can check that out as well. Thank you so much for tuning in. Happy full moon in Gemini, and I will see you in my next video. Take care.